For everyone with an interest in MASH or, more broadly, steatotic liver disease, Surf's Up. Surfing the MASH Tsunami's annual year-end interviews with some of the people who made a difference in the mausald world in 2023. Season 4, episode 50 plus starts now.
Today on Surfing the MASH Tsunami.
The nomenclature for a lot of people is a really big highlight. A lot of the clinicians and researchers were very supportive of it. A lot of patients have commented that the stigma is less and that. So I think we'd be remiss if we didn't recognize that there was a significant change in 2023.
Those are medical terms, and I think they're fine within a doctor's office, in academia, in the context of clinical trials and research and so forth. When you talk to people in the streets, fatty liver is what people understand.
That's like a dual ambition. We need to get that blood test covered so people don't have to pay. It sounds like not a lot when it's $14, but for a lot of people, they don't want to do it and they won't. And secondly, when they go into the labs, they actually have right on the lab record the FIT4 so that the calculations will be done just like A1C as an example, or PSA. Those are calculated like that as well.
That's my big hope for 2024. Hopefully the approval of the Madrigal drug, and hopefully what implications that'll have with the pharmas and others being willing to support patient advocacy efforts like ours and Mike's and global livers, fatty livers, and so forth.
As a momentous year in steatotic liver disease comes to an end, the Surfing the MASH Tsunami team is reviewing the year with some of our favorite guests. Today, hepatology researcher and key opinion leader Jörn Schattenberg and pricing and forecasting guru Roger Green interview two leading patient advocates, Mike Betel of the Fatty Liver Alliance and Tony Villiotti of NASH Knowledge, on key events and initiatives in 2023 on the Surfing the MASH Tsunami podcast.
And this is our second conversation of our wrap-up week, which already has 9 conversations listed and may have more before we're done. Mike Betel is part of this one as well. Mike, how are you this afternoon?
I'm great. Sorry I came early, but you know me, I'm always early.
And Jeff talked a little bit about how appreciative he was by the audience response at the award at the AASLD. And I didn't have a chance to tell him that I got to see the speech because you recorded it. But in our patient advocacy session, we saved a little more time for this and decided we could have 2 people bounce ideas off each other. And the other we have is Tony Villiotti. Tony, how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing well, Roger. Thank you.
So I learned at AASLD that Mike is Tony's adopted fatty liver son.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and in the U.S., with Jews and Italians, or North America, sorry, Mike, with Jews and Italians, ethnics, we know we're all the same family. So that made perfect sense to me. Jörn is with us from a hotel room in Hamburg, actually on his phone, because we couldn't get the audio in the hotel to work very well, but you're on the phone, worked out great. Glad you were able to tough it out and figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah, I'm here. I hope you can hear me. Great to see you, Tony and Michael. Yeah, I'm going to be listening in. Again, it's a little bit more troublesome on this phone, but I'm happy to, hear and participate in the conversation.
It's after 9 o'clock at night for Jörn also, so I'm impressed he's actually looks as alert as he does.
Since the new job, he spends a couple of days a week in a hotel in Hamburg, which is where he is tonight.
Yeah, I hope this is going to resolve soon. It's a temporary thing, but I'm happy to be here.
Okay. So at any rate, simple conversation. Start with just simple, the typical surfing MASH groundbreaker. One good personal thing that's happened in each of your lives in the last week. Brave one, go first.
Well, when you're my age, Roger, just surviving another year is a highlight.
Yeah, happy belated birthday, Tony. Thank you.
So I'm 17 days away from surviving 2023. But the second highlight of the year, my wife and I took a road trip that was postponed from 2018 to Vermont to see some old friends. We visited my old boss, who's also a good friend, visited a friend from college, and finally made our way up to the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont and visited my brother and my niece, who I hadn't seen for 10 years. So that was the highlight of our year.
But when I think back through everything you've been through in the last 10 years, I'm not sure that 10 years ago you knew you were going to get there 10 years later.
No, that's for sure. And I sure didn't expect to be sitting in this podcast.
I get that. Mike?
I'm going to go to travel story too. And I look back at in June when we were going and had a really great meeting in Vienna for EASL. But my wife, Sherry, and my son, Jonah, came with too. And we went to Florence and we went to Vienna to take a 16-year-old who last time he was there, he was a baby, has no memory of it, but to the culture and the food and the people. And it was just in the eyes of somebody who's never seen him before, incredible. I was really excited before it happened and watching it. Not sure he's going to remember it when he's older, in that, from a positive perspective, I made him sit through a 4.5-hour Siegfried opera. So, but he was, but he's 16, and he sat through the entire opera and didn't complain. And we watched it on the little screen and the story and everything. And actually, that's one of my highlights, because I was so impressed that he would do that and not complain. And it was great.
Okay, so while we're doing travel, I'm on this podcast every week, and I've only talked about this 2 or 3 times. There's something amazingly magical about seeing a 5-year-old's eyes the first time she sees Disney World. And I had that experience last month. I can't say enough. It's just the Disney people have got the magic for kids so right. And yeah, they take all the sharp edges off the stories they tell. And yeah, they rewrite a little bit of history. And I don't mean to minimize that. It's not perfect. Just you watch kids entranced. And it's a wonderful thing to see.
Roger, did you do the enhanced pass? I have to ask.
No, you know what? We didn't, but we picked a week when it wasn't really bad. There wasn't anything that we had to wait more than a half an hour to get on, only 40 minutes maybe. So that wasn't bad at all. And we didn't have to do the enhanced pass to do that. Now, we were staying on the properties. We did have early entrance. That helped a little bit. So, Jörn, one personal thing in the last year.
Yeah, the last year.
Yeah, this is 2023.
Oh, that's quite back. I was going to say, and having spent the week away from home, it was great to come back for the weekend, spend the time with the family. Well, what can I say? Making my wife proud. I'm looking forward to actually the weekend. We're going to go to my mother-in-law's birthday and see the family there. Thinking back in the year, personally, made my first trip to Japan. That was memorable. I can tell you more, but that would probably take a lot of time.
Okay, so
Are you a sushi eater, Jörn?
Yeah, it was Kobe, so I had some beef there. But it was quite a time difference.
Yeah, it is that. Listeners to the podcast know that Louise spends a lot of time in Australia now, so she has her own time challenges on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah, it was a professional meeting. So they had the Japanese DDW, and there's a cooperation with the European Association. So they send me. The funny thing is, a lot of the sessions are in Japanese, and they have some in English. So I had some time where I didn't understand a word, so I ventured around.
Okay, so let's go back to this is a wrap-up of 2023, and this conversation is one of 2 or 3 that will be from patient perspective. We're going to be talking to Donna Cryer next week about her coming back to work in January, and we may have one other. So 2023, big year. A lot went on in the disease and the profession and the commerce. What was from the patient portion of the ecosystem, what was the highlight of the year to each of you guys?
You know, the whole year is a long shot.
Yeah, it's hard to remember now.
And again, as a physician or a clinician scientist, I think we've went through a lot of discussions around biomarkers and therapies. That's what the podcast is about. It'll be great maybe to just hear how these ups and downs of some of the results we're discussing have affected patients. Some might be following closely, others not. So it's always a thing. How does that reach the patient, the people affected?
Yeah.
So going into 2023, I'd really had high hopes that a drug would be approved. The rejection of the Intercept application was a low light, not a highlight. But from our personal perspective, we had planned to do a lot in the Hispanic community with families. And we did some things in 2023 that you really got those things off the ground. One of our major priorities was to gain inroads into the local and national Hispanic community. We realized early on that you can't just parachute into the community and say, hey, we're here to help. You have to build trust. And we hosted an event on International NASH Day that was aimed at the Hispanic community. And it was an event that really, we invited people that we were trying to connect with and local influencers in the community. And most of the people we invited did attend, and it did lead to our building relationships with that community. In addition, it kind of intertwined with a personal goal of mine. I'm a big sports fan, big baseball fan, and Roberto Clemente was my favorite Pittsburgh Pirate growing up. And we held the event at the Roberto Clemente Museum, which was kind of on my bucket list of things to do. That was a very fruitful night. We made great contacts. We built a lot of trust in the community, and that was certainly a highlight from our perspective.
So for those who don't know, Roberto Clemente was an American baseball player, Puerto Rican descent, I think really the first great Hispanic American baseball player, and a remarkable person in terms of what he did for community and charities, who actually died in a plane crash trying to get supplies to an impoverished area in Puerto Rico on Christmas Eve in 72, was it, Tony?
Yeah, it was New Year's Eve.
Yeah, and a remarkable human being, somebody somebody that everyone in those American sports and those American baseball admires. So, yeah, when you did that, I smiled because I know you. I know that was a big thing for you. Mike?
Well, I was thinking internally and externally. We had just a few days ago on December 7th, the Primary Care Summit, our second one. And so it was about 50% bigger than our first one. And the interaction was great. We had 17 speakers and 4 moderators. It was a really big event. I'm really happy. And it doesn't sound like a big thing, but it takes like almost a year to prepare it and work on it and, and make sure that it's successful. So that was an internal one. And the other one I was just going to mention was, and you were there, but just to give kudos, and I'll tell you why, that, Madrigal's patient video to me was something that stands out because it's the first time from pharma that we saw a promotion with regard to awareness of the disease states and how any of us can interact with our communities and make a difference. That's really new because we didn't really see that in this space at all. So that was exciting. Not only was it well done, but also just the fact that it was new and it was the first one. I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, I would agree. We were very pleased to have the opportunity to participate in the creation of the ad video. It did a great job and it tells a story, and that's what people relate to, are stories, not facts and statistics. So I thought it was a great, engaging and entertaining video that conveyed a message. The fact that Madrigal elected to go that route is certainly a plus mark in their column because it was definitely needed.
Yeah, I thought that the protagonist, whatever her name is, I forget it, was a remarkably sympathetic and compelling character. If you haven't seen this, by the way, everybody who listens to this podcast, and all 3,000 of you who told us that we're one of your top 10 favorite podcasts, tell all your friends, which Spotify tells me 97% of you do. Tell all your friends they really should get to watch this. It's pretty amazing. About how many downloads does it have so far?
It was over 1 million, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So, Jörn, let me ask you a question. What kind of involvement do you see from the patient organizations in Europe right now and the advocates?
Oh, so that's a good question. And I don't want to miss anybody. Starting to speak for Germany, there's a strong patient organization. There's more patient organization in the rare disease arena than is for the common disease arena. So we've tried together with someone in the field who's been doing some advocacy work previously and has moved on and founded a company to support this, to address obesity and diabetes patient associations. There are clearly more than liver associations, but it's been a little bit of a difficult topic to get them engaged. I mean, they have a lot of challenges themselves just running on the little budgets and the availabilities they have. And, Michael and Tony can tell much more about that than I do because it's difficult to stream the available energy and times you have. So I would say in Germany, it's been difficult to really have a very strong patient support group. There is a patient support group that's more broadly in liver disease, again, frequently also addressing rare liver disease. Speaking about Europe more globally, I think the UK is very well organized, but I can't speak for all countries.
So, Mike, I know you do some work with the LPA.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Jörn about that.
I see a lot of posting from them around the European Parliament, but go ahead.
I was going to ask Jörn that because Marco Korniak is the president there, and I know he's extremely passionate, and they accepted my invitation to help with the opening of our summit, which was really nice. Milan and the rest of their team there, they seem quite engaged, and I think something like 32 countries in Europe are involved with them.
Yeah, ALPA clearly has a very broad reach. Unfortunately, they're not active in Germany at this time. That goes back to some time back, nothing related to NASH, I think. And of course, their activities in particular in Brussels, having had 2 events in Brussels with the politicians, one of them, which I participated in, is great and something to get more broader uptake. For me personally, working more German-centric, it's always been a challenge to get strong or more patients involved. But I think that is a challenge in general in patient advocacy.
Roger, the other highlight that occurs to me is actually the liver meeting. We had a table at the event and we were able to engage with a lot of people, but I kind of felt a burst of energy there, particularly with everything that's going on with the non-invasives and some of the recent results of the drug trials. So I thought that was a highlight, and particularly post-COVID, was a greater turnout in person, and that contributed as well.
Roger, so I'm wrestling in my mind whether to bring it up. I'd say it's 50-50. A lot of people are very supportive. You know where I'm going with this?
Keep going.
The nomenclature for a lot of people is a really big highlight. A lot of the clinicians and researchers were very, very supportive of it. A lot of patients have commented that the stigma is less and that. So I think we'd be remiss if we didn't recognize that there was a significant change in 2023. I'll add that I just got off a call today. The FDA was on. They did talk about the fact that it's now interchangeable in their opinion. So, there was a lot of of issues about whether it's going to impact new drug development or patient care. Frank Anania was the acting director who spoke.
So first of all, Tony, I've probably been quoting you more than anybody else in the entire fatty liver community in the last month and a half on this subject, because it struck me from the beginning there were three issues, right? Number one is, would it get in the way of commercial development? It appears not to have. Okay. Number two, can you overlap the patient populations effectively enough that you understand that we've changed the name, but we haven't really changed what we're talking about? We've changed how we look at the disease differently, but not at which patients have what. And that appears clear. And then the third one was, how do you explain it to everybody? Well, Tony, we just had Jeff on, Lazarus, as you know, for previous conversation. He was talking about how it's going to be hard for a doctor, at least in English, to describe this with a patient without saying fat. But I've shared, as I do frequently, your comment about what happens when you have a heart attack. They write it up as myocardial infarction. They tell you it's a heart attack. That just makes all the sense in the world to me.
Yeah, from my perspective, a large part of what we do is going out and talking to people who don't know anything about their liver. There are really three groups of people, in our view, in the fatty liver world. The people that have fatty liver know they have it and are at least trying to do something about it. The second group is people who have a fatty liver and don't think it's a big deal. And the third group, and by far leaps and bounds the largest, is people that have a fatty liver and don't know that they have it. So when we talk to people like that who may not even know where their liver is, going in there with a new nomenclature just doesn't work. Those are medical terms. And I think they're fine within a doctor's office, in academia, in the context of clinical trials and research and so forth. I think when you talk to people in the streets, fatty liver is what people understand. And in one-on-one conversations, it can be conveyed in a way that does not invoke stigma, but just you have an organ that has too much fat in it. This has been kind of my hot button since this whole thing started. I mean, I was against the change to begin with, just because it complicates my world. All kinds of materials and so forth that have the old speak in it. But like I said, most of what we do is talking to people. And in those conversations, we don't even use the old terminology that much. And we don't talk about so much about NAFLD and NASH. We talk about fatty liver. That people understand the term. We try to reach people where they are, and we talk to them in terms they can understand. And so, the new nomenclature really isn't a great fit in that context.
Okay, so I get the part that goes not a great fit. At the end of the day, having had to deal with this for the last few months, how much of a practical issue has it turned out to be, besides having an organization called NASH Knowledge and a whole bunch of literature that says NASH and NAFLD in it? We've got this podcast with the same problem,
Right. Yeah, well, from a practical standpoint, on the street, this is background noise. No one knows what steatotic liver disease is. And if you talk to them about that, they're just not going to understand. Well, the one thing we have done is we've taken one of the brochures we use, and we've explained the disease in terms of fatty liver, and in parentheses, medical terms, NAFLD or MASLD, NASH or MASH, and then have a section when you talk to your doctor, they may use either of these terms. That's the other issue. You can't wave your magic wand and all of a sudden everybody is using the new language. There are doctors out there that haven't even heard a new language. They're still talking about NASH and NAFLD. So we think it's our role to make sure when we do tell a patient they're at risk and they should talk to their doctor, they need to be prepared to hear either of the terms, MASH or NASH or NAFLD or MASLD. So that's a role we've tried to play in trying to bridging the terminology, but it does complicate things. What has been confusing, even a little more confusing for the person who maybe should be a patient and isn't right now.
I think what we're talking about makes sense in that you can't describe fat in the liver without talking about fat in the liver. And so it's pretty clear that that's still going to have to be a discussion point when patients are going in to see their physicians. So to me, it doesn't matter as long as patients are seeking help and the physicians are recognizing patients who are at risk. Just Tony, I had other patient groups that you didn't talk about before, and it's the patients who know that they have fatty liver disease but don't want to do anything about it. And then there's other patients who know they have fatty liver disease and actually will do everything they can to clear it. So those are two other areas, not just not knowing if you have it, but also the ones who find out that they have it and either they act or they don't, right?
Well, that was me in 2005. I had a fatty liver, but didn't think it was a big deal. Lots of people that fall into that group. Frequently in the street, we talk to someone that says, hey, my husband was told he had a fatty liver or my wife was told, but they're not doing anything about it. They don't think it's a big deal. And we try to make sure they understand the potential consequences. I mean, for most people, it's not a big deal, but there's a relatively large group of people that it becomes a very big deal.
So, Jörn, I have a question for you. Jeff kind of raised this in the last conversation, but we didn't really get to it. When you get out of English into German, in your case, I know you can't do Japanese. We've talked about that already. When you get to German, do you have to talk about fat on the liver? Does the nomenclature change have any impact on how you talk to patients about the disease?
Yeah. So I can well speak on how, as a physician, I speak to my patients, and I'm not using the term metabolic dysfunction steatotic because this is far removed from how I can train or explain the disease to a patient unless he's, deep into the material. So I use the term fat liver, which is the German translation, and I think that's where it becomes dicey because I can't really speak on behalf of my patients. I think that by fusing the two words, the stigma is not as strong as if fatty stands alone as it's seen in English. So some languages have the ability to cause less stigma from my physician perspective just because the word has a little different connotation. I think for many patients, I want to use the term to also detail them what the disease is. I'm not sure you said that, Tony, or maybe you took it from a different perspective, but it's difficult to talk about metabolic dysfunction.
You can say, though, that the patient has fat in their liver.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, or liver fat, right?
The discussion around stigma is using the word fat in the context with the patient, which is bothersome for some and some. It's a difficult topic. And again, as a physician, you get some feedback, but probably not always open or honest. So it's difficult to assess.
Yeah, the stigma thing, particularly with the fatty term, is a difficult one. And personally, I never experienced any stigma related to that. I just thought it was my liver that's fat. But it is tricky, and some people do take offense to it. I mean, ideally, you would want nobody to experience any stigma. That's certainly the ideal. But it's all in how you explain it.
That's a good point. You have to frame it.
If you frame it in terms of you're talking about the person's organ, not them personally, I don't think that comes across as being offensive.
So I'm going to turn back to Mike for a sec because you work with the LPA. What I'm taking out of this conversation are two things. Number one is that the change in nomenclature does not make it easier for doctors to talk to patients. Probably makes it harder, depending upon the degree to which the language constrains what the doctor can say and the doctor understands the underlying disease. But Mike, we're going to be talking to Don and Pryor next week, and I assume Global Liver is on, even though I know they've got a somewhat contrary position on not liking the nomenclature in general. What efforts are you aware of for patient advocates to work with doctors in different countries about how to articulate this? Or is it that we haven't even got doctors to the point where they care?
Well, so first of all, I don't want to speak for GLI, but I know just from a call today, an updated way to look at it is that the changes have been made and they're completely supportive of the new nomenclature and with communicating it and moving forward. So Donna can speak with that.
Great.
But with regard to the second part of your question, I don't know what ELPA is doing. I can tell you, and I mentioned it just briefly before, but the event that we just had, the one with the primary care, my intent in that day was to introduce the new nomenclature, and Maru Ranella had 25 minutes to do that. And yet probably 5 other physicians chose to also talk about the nomenclature as well. So I don't think you can really have too much when you make a change like this. You really have to make sure that it's become a part of everyday language. It's just repetition. So that was an example. We had 4.5 hours and it was discussed a few times. And I think that people who had never heard of it before, and it's very possible, they are probably more familiar with it than before they went into that whole presentation discussion. So I guess what I'm saying is it's going to take a while to get people used to the new nomenclature, but it's here and we need to go with it.
All right. So let's go beyond that. What else have you been working on in the past year, or do you foresee working on in the year ahead? I mean, I think Jeff made the comment, Lazarus, in the last conversation, or one of you folks, as we were wrapping up, that the approval of a drug will send a whole bunch more money into this space. And Mike, you raised the patient service aspect. What do you foresee being possible next year in a world that has a little bit more unity and maybe a little more money? Go ahead, Mike. You put your hand up.
Well, again, I'm in Canada, so Tony can speak for the U.S. and maybe Jörn can speak on the EU. But in Canada, at this moment, FIB4, which is the biomarker calculation, that's quite important, yet difficult to do for some people, especially when AST is not covered and in a lot of the provinces here. And so that's like a dual ambition. We need to get that blood test covered so people don't have to pay. It sounds like not a lot when it's $14, but for a lot of people, they don't want to do it and they won't. And secondly, when they go into the labs, to actually have right on the lab record the FIB4 so that the calculations will be done just like A1C as an example, or PSA. Those are calculated like that as well, right? So I would like to see, as Tony was talking about a little bit before, the NITs that, to change that whole perspective so that we can all have better and quicker access to the information to find out about these diseases.
As far as the NITs, what I'm hoping to see in 2024, with the work that's being done with the Nimble consortium, and I think we're at Litmus as well, hopefully the non-invasive test will become more highly used and become a great addition to the toolbox that physicians can use with their patients. that's my big hope for 2024. Hopefully the approval of the Madrigal drug, and hopefully what implications that'll have with the pharmas and others being willing to support patient advocacy efforts like ours and Mike's and global livers, fatty livers, and so forth. That's an important thing. The industry needs to recognize how important the patient advocacy efforts are. And some of them do, particularly the ones that are closer to commercialization, companies in an earlier stage. Hopefully they will recognize the potential value that we bring.
The other aspect of the NITs is, the VCTE, Sharewave, all of that. And in Canada, it's just the FibroScan that, that's approved. And the wait time is still, in some cases, 6 months. That's ridiculous. We're never going to get anywhere if people have to wait 6 months to get an assessment done. So there has to be more funding to be able to get and more access, not only in the city centers, but everywhere else that's difficult for patients to get to. So access and equity to care is incredibly important everywhere, really.
You posted earlier in the year about having been on the side of the government in Ottawa, the name of which I forget. I keep thinking Federal Hill, but I think that's not right. And actually talking to parliamentarians for the first time in the past year.
Parliament Hill, yeah. We did it under the leadership of CASL, as Canadian Association of Study of Liver. And we had, I think it was like 30 people that went there from across the country. They had never, ever discussed liver. Yet other cancer groups have been there multiple times, like monthly. They have breakfasts and they have other activities to, with educational stuff. Liver, never. And so that was just very surprising and disappointing. And it really highlights the importance of continuing to do that. But access to politicians is not easy. And I note that in the US and in Canada, that groups need help from the experts to have access to the politicians. And even that is really kind of sad.
So what do you foresee doing this year on that front?
Well, we're going to continue to partner with the people that are connected in Ottawa to be able to go back again. We only went once. So I think the first thing up is really to do that again. And so, we're trying to plan that. I know that outside of the NAFLD-NASH space, they had gone for hepatitis also, the same group, because they are in other liver areas as well. So we need to do it again. I don't think it's a trick. I think we just have to put the manpower, the people power behind it and just get back to doing it. The meetings that we had there when we were in Washington, when we were at the A3 with GLI, they trained us and we went there and met with politicians there too on Capitol Hill. It's the same approach. It's really just, as you said earlier, being able to give patients an opportunity to tell the story and to say how it impacts each of the geographic areas across whatever country you're in. Those politicians in those areas are interested in their own jurisdictions mostly, unless they're federal.
So 2 questions in my mind, and Jörn, I know you're on and mute. And question 1 is, what would you like the people who listen to this podcast regularly that aren't patient advocates, the commercial organizations, the clinical research sites, the site managers, and the academic researchers and transplant hepatologists, what would you like them to know about patient advocates and how you can work with them better, or they can ask you for help that will be more effective in the year ahead?
One of the key areas that a lot of the industry who have drugs in development right now, they should be including patients in the development of new clinical trials and then setting up the design of those trials, because patients can offer quite a lot in those areas, from the design setup to compliance and all the way through. So to me, that is a key area. And I'm going to reiterate what Tony said, because he'll probably hopefully say it again too, that the patient advocate groups need financial support to be able to continue to do all of the education that we do. And all of us could use that additional funding. So if they can carve out some funds to be able to continue to increase awareness and support of things like assessments and just general education about these diseases, I think that would be really helpful.
I would certainly concur with that, Mike. There's no substitute for injecting the lived experience into the discussions of clinical trials and even how to market, develop the market for their drugs. For our situation, one of the things we have a heavy emphasis on is early education about the liver. We have, lesson plans, for example, that we're hoping to go into schools with in the coming year and not talk so much about disease, but just talk about the liver, how important it is, what it does, and how you can keep it healthy. And we've developed some of our own materials. We have coloring books that link back to some children's videos that we have done. If companies are willing to invest in helping us introduce that early education, it's kind of a longer term play. But when you talk with the children, they'll talk with their parents. And I think even though it seems long term, the parents will hear about it from their kids. It's like what happened with seatbelts and smoking, and it serves to increase overall awareness. Lack of awareness is certainly one of the biggest issues of this disease. And, they could take a view that organizations like us can reach people who need to know more about their liver and the potential for liver disease. I think they would be well served. It would be money well spent.
Interesting. And that would be true, we think, even for companies that are a little further from market in terms of the drug companies?
Yes.
All right.
Roger, we had done a couple of events in the community, one not that long ago, where we went in, and it's great post-COVID to be able to do that. We had 60 people from the community come in, and we had 3 speakers, and then we had a Q&A after that went on for over an hour. So communities absolutely want to understand more about these diseases. But to keep that sustainable, there's obviously a cost, with regard to even just bringing in food for the event and the venues and that kind of stuff, and the educational materials that you'd give out and stuff like that. So that's another example.
When we go out to networking events, increasingly we sit next to a person. Just yesterday, actually, my daughter Gina, who's our executive director, she's our main networker. They don't really like to let me talk to people. And she sat next to a person that said, just yesterday, I was told I had a fatty liver. That's happening like almost every event that she goes to, where either it happened to them or happened to their husband or wife or a relative. So I think the awareness is beginning to rise, unfortunately, because the disease continues to spread, making people just more informed about what can happen to them and how they can talk to their doctor about it and so forth. I mean, that is invaluable in battling this disease.
All that makes sense. What I hear you guys saying on one level is, at the grassroots, you're doing about as well as you can be doing, given that there's not a ton of support money-wise and doctors don't know a lot about the disease, so you've got to handle all that at once.
Yeah, it's very much a grassroots effort. We're getting people reach out to us and say, I'd like to do in my community what you're doing in yours. And I just shipped the box this morning to Oregon. There's a fellow in Oregon who's battling liver disease that wants to do what we're doing in his community. Enabling us to reach out to people like that and provide them with the resources that we've developed would be extremely helpful. But it costs money.
Point well taken. So tell me about 2024. What'll be different?
Well, we're all hoping for a drug approval for NASH.
Yeah.
Or maybe more than one.
I'm not trying to know where the second one, I take that back. Maybe I know where the second one might come from. Okay, that's fine. So that's number one. Okay. What else about 2024? Mike, how will the third annual primary care, whatever you call the name next year, summit be different from the one this year?
Third annual primary care MASH and MASH summit, I think.
There you go.
I definitely need help from everybody listening to this to make sure that we have more primary care physicians actually tune into it. So we're definitely going to, have access to people after the event too, but I'd like to get more people who are able to actually attend live so they can participate in the Q&A. The primary care focus for me over the next year is to identify where we're at in our country with regard to what's happening. Are physicians ignoring it? Are they just holding people because at the moment there's no drug availability? Are they just passing everybody on to the liver specialists? I need to find out more about what's actually happening with primary care. It's clear that that's the first step here.
Well, okay, so let me push back a little bit. Okay, it's clear from our private conversations that one difference between Canada and the U.S., or frankly most of Europe, is a market without a tremendous number of high-profile fatty liver champions in the hepatology community. I mean, a couple, maybe a few, but not necessarily.
I would say it's a few. We're working on right now with CanNASH. That's under the umbrella of CASTLE. Like I said before, that's Canadian NASH Network, a group of, there's 4 physicians, and putting together Canada's guidelines for MASLD and MASH. And so we'll have those sometime mid next year completed. So that's being worked on right now. We're part of that. But you're right. It's setting up the whole infrastructure and finding out who wants to spend their life doing this and who's going to invest in it financially, but also human resource time-wise.
Yeah, because I mean, traditionally, the way that works is that specialists go out, sponsored by drug companies or whoever, to talk to primary care and generalists about why, from my specialist view of the world, you should care about this. And you know that because you're a pharma industry guy. You're not talking about almost flipping the model. Let's build it in primary care in a place where we don't have a ton of it in hepatology. And I'm wondering how you think that'll work.
Well, I think it's in the best interest of the drug companies that are coming out to be able to start to, well, even with hepatitis, because I went back all the way to the beginning of Hep C, that we used to call it warehousing, but it's preparing the market by, from the health perspective, we're assessing and acknowledging that there are people that have the disease and giving them what they can do now. It's the 5, 10, 7 to 10% weight loss and the lifestyle that some of us poo-poo sometimes, but it does does work in a lot of patients, but I think that's still, until there's an improved drug, that's the way that we have to go. And there's bariatric surgery and balloon and other options that people could do too. But when there's a drug available, then that's the way that's going to get the most exposure for physicians and for the drug companies. So if we can make sure that the primary care has taken the time to assess which of their patients are at risk and already have the disease, then when the drug gets approved, they'd be the quickest way to be able to treat them. If you start from zero, so a drug, you find out in, let's say, March, a drug is approved and nobody has taken the time to assess their patients, how are you going to immediately find who's at risk? You're going to have to start from zero. So you have to identify, first of all, and have these databases.
Point well taken. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I think what Mike is doing with the PCPs is great. We tend to go even a step further down the food chain. We think there's enormous potential for this to be patient-driven. If you can educate people to understand that they have one or more of the risk factors for this disease, and they go in and talk to their doctor, ask them questions, I think there can be a lot of impetus that comes from the patient or the individual themselves. My experience with this has been you really have to look out for yourself. You can't rely on your doctor to find this disease. You have to take the initiative to go into the doctor and say, I want to be tested for this. That will spread in the sense that I know in my situation, once my doctor went through the experience with me, he became much more aggressive about monitoring his other patients for fatty liver disease. So I think if you have patients going in, asking for tests and wanting to discuss liver disease with their doctor, that will reap enormous benefits.
This, Roger, I don't know, and I know Tony's seen this before. The GLI came up with, it was last year, I think, but it's clearly still valuable. 10 questions on a card, 5 questions on each side. Exactly what Tony's talking about right now, that patients can take in to get a little bit of help to basically probe the physician a little bit and entice them to answer some questions that are important.
So it feels to me, from what I'm hearing, that you got a lot of material, you have some resources, that we need generally higher visibility, but you folks feel you're in a pretty good position if you had more money and more resourcing to take the things that you're doing right now and extend them a lot broader. And Tony, I've seen your Hispanic literature. It's fantastic. Yeah, I get that. And Mike, I guess my last question for you on this would be, you're Canadian. You've got Fatty Liver Alliance, which is also foie gras. How multilingual is your program?
Not, except for the name. We're still in our first couple of years. It would be advantageous to be able to do that. It's something that we would definitely have to work towards.
So our global mission this year is to find someone who speaks French that will recruit you patient to the correct patois. I mean, French and Quebecois and Cajun, there's 3 very different patois of French, and there are a bunch more in the Caribbean and other parts of the world. But find someone with the right patois to help you recruit your Quebecois Mike Betel.
We have French physicians that are excellent speakers that would do quite well to be able to, to have someone. I just can't, to your point, I can't be the one to do the podcast interviewing kind of thing, fireside chats in French. It would be
I know you do a ton of work with McGill University, so I knew that you do a lot of work with French-speaking physicians.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. Our first 2 in-person events were both in Quebec. So it's not that we're not going there. It's just, I just can't.
You can't translate the material.
I didn't do very well in school in French. Let's just call it like it.
So this is something that you need money to do, right? Yeah.
It would be duplicating the entire website and all the materials into another language. Yeah.
All right. So what else do you guys want to say to all the people who listen to this today about 2023, 2024, or what they should be engaged in?
I would just, my words would just be excited, be passionate, be caring, empathetic, and keep going, because we have a long way to go.
On similar lines, I would just emphasize, there's a lot of momentum building in fighting this disease, whatever name you want to give it. And just look at the patient as your allies, not as your customers. And hopefully payers will get this message as well. The old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And if money can be devoted to prevention efforts, that would be very helpful. I think things are looking up. Things are very positive, and we just need to continue that forward momentum on this battle.
Duly noted. So thanks. We'll be back tomorrow with more interviews, and we'll be releasing these starting on December 18th, I guess, and over the last 2 weeks of the year. We may start releasing them early if we have a few more. But Tony, Mike, thanks a million.
And now for the Season 4 End-of-Year Episodes Business Report.
Slava Chrini, Chayim Slava, glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes. And also, Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. The last time I recorded a business section for this podcast, the U.S. Congress was delaying getting badly needed aid to Ukraine. The world was decrying the death of Palestinian civilians, while most were forgetting, and even worse, some were celebrating, the horrible rapes, beheadings, and other beastly crimes Hamas committed on innocent Israelis October 7th that precipitated the Israeli military action. I'd love to say that 3 weeks weeks later, things have changed for the better, and there were days of hope in the Middle East during the Israel-Hamas ceasefire. But sadly, little is meaningfully improved. As we come to this holiday season, let's hope the Ukrainian military maintains and perseveres through the coming winter, and that we can find a solution in the Mideast that preserves an Israel that does not have to fear its neighbors and allows a Palestinian people who live next to them to find peace and prosperity and pursue a better quality of life for their families and themselves. Slava Ukraini, Am Yisrael Chai.
Congratulations, Jörn, and welcome back.
Last time we met, it was too soon to announce Professor Schattenberg's promotion to department head at the medical school in Saarland. Well, that's official now. Jörn has assumed his new responsibilities, and he will be with us on a more or less regular basis going forward. We may need to work a bit on how to improve his internet speed and reliability when staying overnight in Hamburg. I'm sure we'll work that out.
Hey, Spotify, thanks for the good news.
Last week, we received from Spotify their wrap-up numbers from 2023. What these numbers told us was that we had more growth this year than we had anticipated. 50% more listeners, 11% more streams, 72% of people listening doing so for the first time. And if we extrapolate up from Spotify's share of our entire listener pool, 3,000 listeners who rate us in their top 10 podcasts, 2,000 rating us in their top 5, and 750 rating us their overall top. Those are bigger numbers than we thought we had, and we're excited to know that so many people are gaining benefit from this podcast.
You will see new graphics and a new email address when we all return in 2024.
In the interest of efficiency and recognition of Eric's increasingly demanding schedule, we decided to execute the entire graphic and website cutover to MASH Tsunami. All will be fixed when we come back in the beginning of the new year.
The vault is closed for 2023.
Historically, we've included neither Vault conversations nor business sections during the year-end interview series. No more Vault this year as well, but there are a few business section comments I want to share. These may change during the interview week or not. If they change, we'll let you know. And that's it for the year. I want to thank our team, Jörn, Louise, Jake, Mike, Eric, Steve, for their work throughout the year, and more important, to thank you, the listeners, who stuck with us throughout. We've got more interviews ahead, and after that, we'll be back early in January with a new year of episodes and perhaps some new features as well. Until then, enjoy the holiday, happy 2024, and as always, stay safe and surf on. Bye-bye now.
Join us tomorrow when our interview partner will be hepatology researcher and key opinion leader Dr. Naeem Alkhouri.